So what we're going to look at in this video is what has caused the increase in income inequality in the last few decades in most economies in the world. The Gini coefficient has worsened, and so inequality has increased within most countries. Well, the reasons for this I've outlined in 7 key factors. So the first factor is perhaps the increasing gap between the earnings of the labour force that's highly skilled compared to the unskilled workers. So if, say, particularly as a result of information technology, if you're a skilled computer programmer, your wages will come at a significant premium, the demand will be relatively high compared to supply, and that'll push your wages up, compared to, say, if you're a cleaner or you're working at McDonald's or Starbucks, where the potential supply is much greater and your wages tend to be pushed down relative to the demand. So this has increased the wages gap in many economies. Now, a second factor that's related to this is executive pay, which has risen exponentially since really the 1970s, particularly from the 80s onwards. This was significant. So, for example, at Barclays, the chief executive officer in 1979 was on 87,000 a year. That's 14 times average UK earnings. Whereas in 2017, the chief executive officer in his basic pay, Paul was a man, was on 4.5 million. That's 169 times average earnings. And that's not taking into account bonuses. So what's happened with executive pay is a bidding war for a relatively small supply of labour, which has really pushed up wages. Shareholders tend to be convinced that highly paid CEOs will stop them going to other companies and will pay for great performance, and that of course is not supported necessarily by the evidence or books like Taleb's Fooled by Randomness. Also, that's in the context of a global market, particularly the US market, which has also increased the demand for chief executives of large companies, such as companies in the FTSE 100. So their pay has risen exponentially. In fact, the pay gap between the bottom and the top of firms is greater than it has been really since Victorian times. And then the third factor, which is significant for many countries, is the tax systems become less progressive and more regressive. In other words, the rich are people who earn more are being taxed less at lower rates, and those at the bottom of society are paying a greater proportion of their income in tax. So in the UK, income tax has fallen. For example, in 1979, it was 83% at the top rate on top earners, and that fell to 40% in 1988. And for quite a while, it's been 45%. Corporation tax has also fallen. That's a tax on corporate profits. VAT, which is a regressive tax, which the poor pay and lower earners pay disproportionately larger part of their income on, VAT has increased, and so have other excise duties, which are indirect taxes. Also, in the same time, benefits, some welfare benefits being cut, at least in real terms, taking into account inflation. This has occurred in many countries, exceptions perhaps being Scandinavian countries, where this hasn't occurred to the same extent as countries in the English-speaking countries, such as England, or Britain rather, and the USA. Fourthly, Karl Marx said that one of the big issue of capitalism, of course, the battle between workers and owners. The owners take profits, workers, of course, are taking wages. So what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years is that the share of national output taken by profits for the owners has increased, whereas the share of output taken by workers in the form of wages has actually fallen. So that we have this increased inequality between the owners of capital, who receive the profits, and the workers that supply the labour that receive wages. It's meant to be about 6% of GDP in many countries. over the last 2-3 decades. In-work poverty is another growing problem. So 2/3 of those in relative poverty in the UK are people who are in jobs. In-work poverty is when people are working in a job, but they have low wages and they often have to supplement it by having a second job or a third job. And this problem is being exacerbated by the reduction in trade union power and membership, which has occurred in many countries since the late 70s. Because unions can organise collectively to push up wages, which is a countervailing force against the power of large companies that can push down wages, especially if they're the only buyer, which we call monopoly power. So in leisure, catering, hospitality, it's quite hard for unions to organise workers, unlike, say, a mining pit where all the workers are in one place. If you've got shops spread out across the country like the United Kingdom, it's very hard to get people to join a trade union. So many of these workers, about 1 in 10 in leisure, catering and hospitality, are actually in the union. It's mostly a non-unionised workforce and therefore often lower paid. A sixth factor, which is sort of related, is we've had a hollowing out of the labour market as a result of deindustrialisation. So what's happened is manufactured jobs in manufacturing rather, have fallen. At the moment in the UK, there's sort of less than 2.5 million jobs in manufacturing. And we've had a replacement of those by jobs in the service sector, or people have just become inactive within the labour market. Both of these things, of course, result in an increase in income inequality. So there's a fewer reasonably well-paid middle-income jobs, fewer skilled jobs that are manual jobs, such as being a shipbuilder, a steel worker, a car factory worker, or a miner. Okay, these jobs have either been replaced by robots, or the goods are produced in other countries. So this deindustrialisation has led to more low-paid service sector jobs that are low skilled, as we referred to here on point 1, and also, of course, more highly paid jobs at the top. But the hollowing out in the middle has occurred there, a key factor, I think, number 6, to do with the structure of the economy. Right, the last factor is sort of regional inequality. So there's also in, say, the United Kingdom, a north-south divide. If we look at the gross value added, it's about 42,000 in London in 2016, whereas in the northeast it's only 18,000. The gross value added is just a measure of income plus profits, divided by the working population, and you can see quite regional disparities have increased in Britain between the north and the south. The south, and particularly London, is high levels of productivity and therefore higher incomes, and therefore considerable regional inequality within the United Kingdom, which you might see reflected, for example, in the Brexit vote. Also, rural-urban divide is significant within rich countries such as Britain. One of the poorest counties by income in Britain is Cornwall, for example. But also in the world, such in China, the rural economy is very based on low productivity agricultural work, whereas the urban economy is based on higher productivity manufacturing work. So if these combination of 7 factors explain really why income inequality has increased over the past few decades. So thank you for watching.